Life in Letters.
The presenting sponsor of My Life in Letters is SprayPlanet.com. This is where you go to get everything MTN colors, be it 94, hardcore, whatever it is, go check them out. They're also the distributor of Crink products, Posca markers, and Grog inks. So go check out SprayPlanet.com right now, order something, and go make your mark. But without further ado, let's get into this next episode. My Life in Letters, we are back again. You know, every single fucking episode I do, I say, My Life in Letters, we are back. I should probably work on that. Actually, let me just say this thing real quick before I introduce our esteemed guest that I have on the phone. We're going to take a moment in a few weeks after this episode is released to pause on the podcast, and we're going to do a little bit of rebranding and reimagining of what the podcast can be, including the intro and the time of the episode recordings and how long we're going to play them and when we're going to release them. So I just want you guys, all you listeners out there and subscribers, to know that there's going to be a little bit of a pause on the podcast after episode 50, and then we're going to come back a few weeks later, revamped and renewed. Okay. Now that's out of the way, I'm really excited, honored, and, just like stoked to learn more about this man that we have on the phone right now, Tuke from DF crew. You're in Colorado right now. Dude, it's an honor, man, to get you on the phone. I really appreciate you carving out the time to come and chop it up.
Yeah, great, man. It's good to be here.
Yeah.
Followed your work for quite some time too, and so I'm just likewise honored to be talking to you.
Dope. Yeah, I appreciate that. And we were talking before the interview that like you started writing in 1991, and then you had an experience that happens late in 2007 that stopped you from writing for many years. And we're going to get to all of that. But what I really like to do on this show, I don't pre-plan questions, as everybody listening knows, but I do have the same first intro kind of question of talking about some experience you may have had with lettering and a way that it had some sort of an impact on you before graffiti. I wonder if you have any stories or any experiences pre-graffiti that you could share?
Yeah. So, first off, I was in high school in those years right before 91. I ended up moving to Denver to go to the Institute of Art. And those 4 years before I moved up here pretty much was when I was exposed to hip hop in general. And that's when, Beastie Boys were really big, and that whole kind of wave was sort of taking over. And being a kid from a small town, suburbia, more or less, I was exposed to that whole style. And one of my friends in art classes all through high school, both my parents are artists, and so I always had a sort of creative outlook. And but one of my buddies had a lowrider truck, and because I was like the style at the time, and the whole thing was, these kind of graphic geometric shapes with paint splatters and like real simplistic stuff. But it all had that sort of graffiti feel to it. And I was exposed to it and even started using some of those ideas in my work, but never really making the connection of where this came from. Even though that I kind of briefly exposed to the whole hip hop movement, I just, it was never something thinking like, oh, what are the roots of this kind of culture or style or whatever.
Definitely. And so you said that you came up to Denver in 91 or 1990 or whatever for the Institute of Art. Where were you growing up?
Mm-hmm.
Where'd you grow up?
So I'm from Sedona, Arizona, and like I said, it's a small town, but it's very artsy down there. Both my parents being artists, they're involved in the whole fine art scene down there. And so when I started getting into like, graffiti-esque kind of lettering and style and cartoon characters and even like the whole kind of heavy metal image or whatever, I was sort of going against the grain in a way, because the whole thing was all along was kind of like, oh, well, if you cater your style to this, even at an early age, I was getting that kind of an influence of like, if you kind of cater to these fine artsy styles or whatever, then you can make a career out of this. But of course, being a rebellious teenager, I was just like, I don't want nothing to do with that. And something about that sort of urban graphic, bright colors and paint splattery, organic kind of stuff, really appealed to me even at that early age. And
I'm curious, like all those years, like let's say high school in Sedona, there was no graph that you were seeing there.
No.
Graffiti? Okay, interesting.
No, and years later, after I was actually exposed to the whole graffiti. Okay, so I guess flash forward a little bit to, I moved up here. I got into school, and right off the bat, I met a couple of other writers. One in particular, a guy who wrote Rasta 68. Not the Rasta from New York, but a different one. And he was into piecing, tagging, kind of the whole gamut of things, and exposed me to a few other writers that then, immediately as soon as I met these guys, it was a thing of like going out painting with them, trying to sort of, even though I had a little bit of those styles to begin with, I was, all of a sudden realized and made those connections of like, oh, this is where this came from. And so at that point in time,
I got to ask, with Rasta 68, so you met him through the Institute of Art?
I did.
And
yeah.
So you were I guess a college freshman. You were like 18 or something?
Yeah. I actually moved up here when I was 17, but yeah. And then
with that guy Rasta, I mean, so this is your very first introduction to anything graffiti is through Rasta 60.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What was your like impressions of it, if you can remember, like first?
So yeah, I definitely can remember at the very first onset of it. I met this guy who's kind of like this wild character, definitely a partier. And I looked at his stuff and I thought, this is okay, but it's, I think that's something that happens fairly often. You can look at a particular style of art and you think, whatever. Mm-hmm. And then you actually try it and realize that there's something about this, like painting letters and making them look really clean and precise, that is actually very challenging. At the onset, you think, oh, that's easy, But to get nice, straight, clean lines, especially back then when it was all stock caps and it was, yeah, definitely. He also turned me on to another guy that I never had the chance to meet him in person. I talked to him a few times on the phone. Anyway, he's a guy named Fie. Fie, and he was another one of the sort of Denver pioneers. And this guy, I mean, for that particular time, he had actually finished piecing about a year or two before I even moved here. But he'd had a good run before that, and all of his work was just like so clean and precise. I mean, even now, looking back at his stuff, and seeing the way he would do fades and cut lines and whatever, it was incredible. I mean, and especially at that point in time.
And sorry to cut you off, but since I don't know either of their styles, can you talk a little bit about what Rasta and what Fie, what they kind of look like?
Yeah, I would say that both of them kind of, it was that old school New York kind of quintessential flavor. Almost it came to like Lee or certain like elements of Fie's work were reminiscent of like Futura. You do these cool fades and stuff, and those kind of, I mean, their styles were different, but that was definitely the influence.
Okay, dope.
So,
did you ever find out, like with Rasta in particular, since you seem to know him better, who brought him up and how he learned to do graph?
That's actually a good question, and I think that I'm not positive. I know we talked about it, But I'm pretty sure it was because of the whole New York movement. I can't remember any names in particular.
But yeah,
But
I know that like in the mid '80s there was like a big wave that hit the West Coast. So it could be, of course, anybody and anything that influenced Rasta. I was just curious if maybe.
Well, so it was interesting. He had lived out in New York for a little while, and so he had been exposed to that whole scene out there. And then he moved to Las Vegas and lived out there for a few years. And I don't know if he was necessarily influenced by any of early writers in Vegas, but I think he actually took elements of the whole casino signs and all that kind of commercial art aspect of it in a weird way. Like I know it's maybe hard to picture without seeing his work, but he would add little elements that were definitely like more commercial kind of.
It sounds kind of a little ahead of the curve too. I feel like I see that a lot nowadays.
Right.
So that's pretty cool. Another question I had for you about, let's just say with Rasta's work is, where did you see it? Like in 91, where were you seeing Graph, and were you in Denver or were you outside the city?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I was in Denver.
Yeah. So
I was living.
Where were the spots?
So there was a few places that were kind of left over from this wave that had hit just before I got to the city. A couple of them were already gone. There was a place called the Bomb Shelter that was torn down by the time I got here, but there was still pictures all around of the work that was done there. Anyway, there's a place right across the train tracks from that was called the Towering Inferno. It's actually a old grain silo flour mill, I believe, that even still exists to this day. Kind of a funny little side story is that this place, I mean, it was gutted out, all the windows broken out. The elevator shafts were these like gaping kind of abyss down into God knows what. There was machinery of kind of every kind that you can imagine, weird things like old lockers, and it was a really kind of dark and dismal place, and a lot of hobos and transients would hang out in there. People party in there and whatever.
And just hearing about it.
Yeah, right. And it was so cool. But about, I want to say 15, 18 years ago, I could be off a little bit on the dates. They ended up changing it into these like designer lofts, basically, which is so bizarre to all of us because, I mean, this is a place that like reeked of urine and like God knows what happened inside of there, but like at any rate. So that was
too, obviously.
Right. And
one place so that was seeing it, and did Rasta?
That was a huge
by the way,
place.
Did you guys? Were you in school together? Is that how you were introduced?
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Yeah.
And was he just like openly like, "Yo, I'm Rasta 68," or did it take a little time for you guys to develop that kind of trust?
So we had these like portfolio cases that we would carry around our supplies and he right off the bat, like as soon as he got it, like primed the side of it and started doing pieces on the side of it, and like I said, I was already sort of into that style to begin with, and so as soon as I saw it, I was like, whoa! And so I approached him, and just this inquisitive nature of like, what's this all about, and almost immediately we started hanging out and like going and drinking and just hanging out with each other, and he sort of, so he lived in this place. It was called Progresso Gallery, and it was owned by another guy but inhabited by a few different writers, and they had done these great big shows there the year before, and so there's all these panels set up in there. I go over there to hang out with them, and there's all these panels set up with these pieces, and there's this wall right inside of the doorway that was just covered with tags of like pretty much everybody in Denver and some. And and it was through that spot that I ended up meeting his other friends and co-painters, and he was part of a crew called Sin, or short for Syndicate. And I eventually ended up getting into that crew, but at first it was just, it's overwhelming in some respects of like, oh my God, there's this whole thing that exists. And I'm just now like realizing and making these connections between a style that I'm already using, just didn't know the roots of it. So,
and when you say you were using that style, you were like doing what, like painting canvases with that sort of lowrider abstract thing that you said you gravitated towards?
Yeah, exactly. I was doing canvas work, airbrushing, a little bit of clothing. We'd even done some murals around in the town that I lived in.
And so let me just ask you about some of that stuff. You weren't doing letters. What were you painting?
Yeah, I was doing some letters. I would take like just a word or it's like the beginnings of this idea of like a tag, but never an actual like using a name per se.
Yeah, okay.
Just something like a word that I liked or whatever, and would try to put this kind of style to it.
Okay, so you were stylizing letters in Sedona.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, it was.
All right. Yeah. And so you already had like some letter forms that you'd been working with. You clearly knew about color and other things. You have artist parents, so you've had like this artistic upbringing. Then you go to college in Denver and you meet Rasta. And then it sounds like also that like you had things already in place. You had a foundation to build off of. And so then
right.
you meet Rasta and you learn about graffiti. Also, you're in Denver, which has pretty rich history by 91. Like, I mean, there'd been graph there for, probably 10 years, actually, maybe more.
Yeah.
And so that's also kind of something. You went from small town Sedona with no graph to Denver that has a scene. Do you remember in 91 or at this time when you met Rasta, you mentioned that door with all the tags of all the names in Denver, but had you been taking in the scene before that? Or was it all just kind of happening at the same time?
I noticed it a little bit, but it was pretty much all happening at the same time. I think I met him, like I got up here, got a place, started school, and met him all in the course of like probably a couple weeks, and already I'm like going out and like hanging out with him within maybe 3 weeks, You're
getting like a crash course in like graffiti culture, Denver graffiti culture. And that probably had a lot of elements that maybe were unfamiliar to you, including like gang culture and, like that. I mean, you probably had a lot of like, I'm guessing Chicanos and Cholos in Sedona, but nothing like it would be in Denver just because of the numbers of people.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that must have been, was it a bit of a culture shock?
In a way, yeah.
But you embraced it. Like you were into it.
Definitely. Denver still has, even today in some ways, even though it's a growing city, it still has elements of this sort of like small town mentality. So it is probably like a good city to transition that way. The scenes they're growing now more than they were at that point in time. But back then, I think it was pretty tight knit. Like everybody pretty much knew each other. And, but still, even though, coming from that small town background, it was sort of a culture shock and just sort of like, oh my God, all this stuff going on at the same time. So yeah.
That's cool. And then, so did you like immediately have thoughts of doing graph? Like when you see Rasta's pieces and you're like into it and it's all clean. I mean, you had said one thing that you were like, that's not so good until you maybe tried it yourself or looked further into what it takes to craft, to do the craft. Right. How long did this take for you? Did you jump right in?
Pretty much. Yeah. It's funny that the very first thing that really appealed to me, which was, I think, a little more rare back then, was stencils. I thought oh, this is this really cool idea. And I was immediately taken by the whole kind of rebellious nature of just the act in general. And so I tried my hand at stencils. Like, that was the first thing I did, trying to, like, at first just simple ones, and then trying to figure out how to break down into like multicolored layered, pieces or whatever. And within a pretty short amount of time, got frustrated with the tedious nature of it. And then just wanted to, like, stick with the can itself and start figuring out how to. But I think that was sort of like a good entry into it, to sort of just familiarize myself with spray paint in general, and then start working forward from there.
And I'm just curious about those stencils, because is this some of the first spray paint that you were using, or were you even just like still using your airbrush?
No. At this point, I was using spray paint.
And so, was that your first time, or had you played around with spray paint in Sedona?
I think I maybe, picked up a can once or twice or something, but never, like, probably for something unrelated.
Yeah. Okay.
Not ever, like, thinking about it as a tool that I could use for art.
Mm-hmm.
So
those first stencils, what were they?
Mainly like kind of comic book style characters. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe some little letter stuff or whatever, but I it was funny because, I think back on that now, and it's like completely wrong way to go about it, especially as far as like trying to figure out a hand style or something like that, or even like, some kind of letter form to work off of. But, when getting into it, you don't really understand the dynamics of it. So
yeah, no, of course. And then my next question is about Rasta and mentorship. Did Rasta take you under his wing, or how would you describe like that relationship as far as the two of you are concerned? Yeah.
So within a relatively short amount of time, he had introduced me to a couple other guys. One who went by Mac. He went on to write Love a little while after that. And another guy named I6. And both of those guys had a more advanced style. Like I said, Rasta's style as far as lettering was a little more like New York influenced. The other guys that I met after that, they had that sort of elements of those styles, but they'd pushed forward a little bit and gotten into more of, I don't know, maybe some of the West Coast influence, or something about it was like evolving past that more basic stuff.
Oh, definitely. And thinking about, like, I knew people in 91 from well, no, not 91, a little bit later, 93, that were moving up to Denver, and they had been writing in the Bay for many, many years. So I'm also thinking that, like, Denver probably was getting a lot of transplants even that early, bringing lots of different style and influence to the city.
Yeah, I'd say so. Because I think there was, like, even if there's just people like passing through, there's somehow, like, because at one point in that early ages, I ran across this guy. He wrote Rome, Rome. He was from France, and he like, it was just passing through. He somehow heard about Progressive Gallery, ended up coming by. He had another guy with him that I can't recall what he wrote, but these guys were definitely more advanced because they were, part of the European scene, which maybe had a leg up on us. But the main thing was that they had completely different styles. Like, he had, before I'd even thought of the idea, he had done these letters that were characters that were like posed, like little b-boy characters that would, form a letter. And I, at that point in time, I'd never even thought about something like that, to make a letter into something else. And it wasn't until years later that I saw Risk, and I'm trying to remember who else I saw early on that utilized that. Eventually, like, Totem and some other people, use that same thing. But this was early on, but point being that I think there's a lot of people that were coming through Denver that were sort of adding to it. And so it was really cool to sort of get into it at those early stages and sort of catch all these different ideas.
Yeah.
So,
and so then, like, what did Rasta do? Did he, would you guys sit down and sketch? Did he take you to spots? How did that kind of mentorship look?
Yeah, so we would mainly like hang out, drink 40s, and then, smoke weed, and go paint. And that was essentially made up our hanging out. And then inevitably anywhere that we would go in the process, we're getting up. And like I said, the other guys that I got introduced to through him, it's the same kind of thing. And that.
What was that first tag that you started putting up when you were going around with Rasta?
Shit. Okay, so the very first thing I wrote was Kra, which is Kra, which it's so embarrassing.
Why? I mean, that sounds pretty good.
Well,
what's the meaning?
Okay, so my name's Noah, and so then I figured like art is, people are always joking about, oh, Noah's art, yeah. And so I figured that was like something that was a spin off of that or whatever.
It's actually kind of cool. Some terrible names. You have no idea some of these names I've heard. So Kra is like, it's not bad.
Yeah, well,
still good.
Yeah. Fairly short time. I think there was two other names that I picked up like pretty soon after that. One was Virus, and I liked that name, but I'm glad I kind of let it go because I found out years later that there's the other Virus up in Canada. And then the other name that I chose was Too Quick. I understood the sort of nature of names and how people were using numbers to and sort of this ancestry type of idea. Yeah. And so I knew that there was a Quick that was out in New York. So instead of writing Quick 2, I just decided to switch it around, and that way it would be a more original name. And I kept that name through a few different spellings and different styles or whatever, more or less to the present day, because Tuke was, and this is jumping ahead a bit, but I ended up at a certain point catching a lot of heat and needed to figure out some kind of alias. And so Jer, who we had become good friends by this point, suggested, well, why don't you do something different with your existing name? And we thought, okay, well, first and last syllables of Too Quick would end up being Tuke. And that way, it's kind of a cool idea, and
definitely,
and a way to make up
that Too Quick. Has like that. You started. What year were you doing that? Was that 91 or a little bit later?
No, it was a little later. I'd say probably 92 or so is where I picked up that name.
Cool that like took a second kind of lineage or whatever and continued on into Tuke. So that's kind of a cool story. I was also interested in those early days of Kra and Virus and Too Quick. Like, where were you getting up? Because I can imagine you're a college student at an art school, and there was probably a lot of tagging in the art school to start off with. But were you going out to spots, and did you start bombing with Rasta?
Yeah, almost right off the bat. And at that point, there's already a fair amount of people up in Denver. And so it's just sort of like following that trend or whatever.
Can you talk about
I
some of the
did
guys
end up.
that you were seeing up in Denver at that time? The guys besides Rasta that were, I don't know, inspirational, or you just couldn't not see them because they were everywhere?
Absolutely. Okay, so the whole X-Men crew, which is at that point in time was a separate entity from the New York X-Men. They've since merged over the last however many years, but at that time it was Mask, Vestige. The big influence is Phase 3. I saw him up a lot. Shoop early on. Facade. See who else was big back then. Zone. And I mentioned Love and I6. Those guys were up definitely.
Yeah. Okay. I mean,
Phi.
Those are some great names. Some of those I know, some I don't. And I think it's always interesting that we try to dig up a little bit of all those names that we grew up seeing. So I'm glad that we just added that in.
Yeah.
So, you said that Rasta was taking you to spots. Where were these spots? I mean, you mentioned that flour mill spot and a couple other probably abandoned spots. Did Denver in the 90s have, like what we had in San Francisco, these like sort of abandoned pits where, buildings were at one point and then they were gone?
Yeah.
Yeah, you did have pits.
Yeah. So it wasn't, pits per se, but so like, there's viaducts that used to come into downtown Denver. At one point in time, there was still 2 of them standing that weren't even in use. And so there's walls, support walls that were holding them up. Those are always good places to paint. There's also another area of the train yards that had, they were kind of small, like they're only like 6 or 8 foot walls, but those were good walls as well. They were left over from, I don't know what kind of factories or whatever. The bike path walls all along downtown have always been great places, but there was a wave before I got here where it actually ran for a little while, but by the time I got there, they were on it. Those walls would always get buffed really quick, but they're great places for toss-ups, getting up, whatever.
Okay.
And then in those early days too, trains were good. And then the occasional like rooftops or, billboards or, stuff like that.
You had plenty of options, lots of places to go.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. And were there any one of those in particular that you focused on more than another throughout those early years?
Yeah, I think the train yards were kind of the main focus, and mainly just because is a whole little stretch that started around Spear Boulevard and then continued up past I don't know, like around 38th or so. And there's all these walls that faced up to the rail yards it was really kind of more of an industrial district back then. Nobody really cared. I mean, you could more or less be down there in the day. You're still going to probably, catch a little heat or whatever now and then. But, and then like I said, the viaduct walls those are great. I mean, again, nobody really cared. Yeah.
Wait, were you guys painting freights? Well, I mean, they were right there. I wonder when that started for you guys. So what year did you first go into a train yard and bomb trains?
So you hit it right on the dot there. Like we were right there anyway. And so we didn't really, those early years, I didn't really think to do pieces. Once I started like figuring out toss-ups and that came a little bit later, but initially it was only just tagging on trains. I would say that started like 92, 93 in that area. There was only like a few times where I'd actually like kind of go all out and try and do an actual piece on a train back then.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, we were slipping for so long. Painting, we would be painting the sound walls of these near these freight yards, and we never painted the trains. I don't know what we were thinking like early on.
Yeah, right.
Except maybe you said like maybe a tag here and there, but I think it wasn't in our sort of understanding that they were going to roll away and people would see cities. Like, had we known that sooner, of course, we probably would have been hitting.
Right.
So I wanted to see if that was the same for you. And it sounds like it kind of was. And, you know, another thing that I wanted to ask about spray paint was that early on, those first couple of years, 91, 92, 93, did Rasta show you where to get paint? Were you racking? Like, how were you getting the paint, and what kind of paint were you using in those first couple years?
Yeah. So, you know, that was sort of like the heyday of Krylon. And so naturally that was, you know, what was the most sought after. But being a kid in art school and, you know, partying all the time, whatever, it wasn't like I had a lot of money. So, yeah, we were racking anytime we could. But also there was like a couple of hardware stores that were down in the hood, and they would have, you know, cheapo kind of crap paint. And we used that too. I mean, we didn't really, you know, and of course Rusto and anything that we could really get our hands on. We didn't really, we weren't choosy about it or, you know, set on a certain thing. And I think it was probably about, and it's funny because you mentioned him earlier, and listening to his interview, there's a whole section where he talked about when he first got exposed to caps. And similar thing for me. Like, my buddy, I think the very first one I played with was a tester cap, you know, which would be now considered a New York outline or whatever. And it like blew my mind.
Game changer.
Yeah, for real.
Did Ross hook you up with that knowledge that Tester added those caps?
No, that was Mac who turned me on to that. And I ended up going out to LA somewhere right around that same point in time. And at that point in time, I mean, that was probably 92 or so, and beginning in 93. And it was just blown up out there. I mean, it was just insane,
great scene,
you know?
It was really special.
Yeah. Yeah. So I go out there and I see these guys like getting freeways with, I think probably even extinguishers, but I didn't even know or comprehend really that. But definitely fat caps and, you know, getting these just huge, beautiful flares and like, how are they doing this? You know, I come back and I'm just like pumped on that whole trip and inspired by all of it. And so we start just going out while we're racking, just anything that was on the shelf that we could find. We're like trying to use the caps. And I think one of the first fat caps I found was on a glass cleaner, and would be Rusto fat, you know. And I can remember the first, I had a can of True Blue. I put it on there, test it, and it's just this like glorious like blast of heaven comes out. And it's like so fat, and I'm just like, oh my god, that's where they're doing it. You know, this like epiphany of like, oh my god, what all the things that I can do with this. You know,
it's amazing how just a simple tool like that can change your thinking. You know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And so it did. It opened up doors for you. Like, you know, you had the ability to expand stylistically.
Definitely. That, and also that was the point where I would say on a tear as far as like, I wanted to be up. And also when I was out in LA, it was the first time I really kind of thought about that these guys are hitting it on all different levels. There's these bombing, toss-ups, rooftops, heavens, walls, and characters, pieces, backgrounds, like the whole gamut. And I immediately kind of latched onto this idea that I want to be all of these things. And I knew somehow that to me, that was what was the crafting of a good writer, is to be able to like hit all of these different things. And so that's kind of what I came back with, this whole renewed energy and inspiration, and that's what I set out to do. And I think that's the point where I really like got a lot of attention. One, because I'm just bombing like crazy, but two, because I'm also trying to push the envelope as far as like piecing and characters and whatever, and just sort of grow my skill all the way around.
Can you talk about how that growth happened? Like, were you always sketching? For instance, just like talking about letters, did you draw a lot to figure out letter forms, or were you on the wall figuring it out?
I'd say it was a little of both. And I'd had certain influences, like even before, high school years, I was into calligraphy. That was one of the things that my parents sort of inspired in me. So I had that kind of cursive-y, wanting to incorporate little things like that into it. And then once I was exposed to the LA scene, figuring out more like simplistic, like toss-up letters, but then wanting to move in that direction, as well as a more refined piecing style letter. So, but yeah, there's a lot of sketching. As far as toss-ups and whatever, that was more, I'd say, on the wall and like, getting whatever spots I could. Billboards for a minute were just really my jam, because I was stoked on it. I've always loved climbing on things. So,
definitely. I'm curious about how your school life balance was happening with trying to go all out, because you're still in school, I presume, at this time, right?
Yeah, right. And
you said this is like you were really going at it. So I wonder, like, how often you were going out bombing, how you balanced the workload of school, or if you did balance it.
Yeah, well, I maybe started to create some bad habits as far as that went, because I found that I could usually knock out my assignments like the night before and still get a decent grade. And so I definitely was putting far more attention on getting up, drawing, painting, working in books, whatever, than I was on my schoolwork. And in a lot of ways, I felt like I got far more out of my own personal kind of pursuits than I ever did out of school. But
and so
there were elements.
How much bombing were you doing? Like,
I'd say like,
how many nights a week?
Oh, definitely. I would say like I was trying to go out almost every night, but sometimes during the winter it'd be limited if it was cold, crappy weather or whatever. But I also realized that when it was actually snowing late at night, the city would like close down. And so I could be out there cruising around and it was like so quiet and peaceful and like just, have a free for all pretty much, because nobody wants to be out in that.
Yeah.
And especially at, 2-3 in the morning.
And when you say cruising, were you driving around? Were you biking around? Were you walking? How were you going out?
Mainly walking.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mainly walking. And those early days too, it was a lot of like catching buses, so that, because that was another one of those LA influence things. Those kids, like, the buses are just slaughtered, So
color ink, you can imagine,
Yeah. So, there would be a lot of that, like catching a transfer and just like hitting on your way from wherever, to your destination, you're like, get off at almost every other stop so you can catch a different bus, catch a shelter, catch whatever.
You were catching like marker tags inside, or were you catching spray paint tags outside, or both?
A little bit of both. Usually, like for buses, it was markers, streaks, and scribes. That was the fun stuff. So
Still is.
Yeah.
And so that's cool. So you were like on the excuse me, on the daily, you were going out bombing at this time. It's a 4-year program at the Institute of Art?
It was 2 years at that time.
Oh, okay, all right. And so then you did graduate.
Yeah, I ended up doing pretty lousy on one semester, and so I ended up having to retake some of my classes. So, but yeah, it was just a little past 2 years that I ended up graduating.
Okay. And then, so let's keep pushing forward on that. So then you graduate, and then what was you were still bombing, I guess, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how did things progress, for the next, let's say, year or two after school?
Yeah, so I got out of school, and I was kind of half-assed trying to use my degree to get, into some kind of commercial application of my skills, but it was kind of challenging. Like I said, I'd spent most of my time focusing on graph and letters, and so I didn't really have the chops to make it in a more commercial setting. I wasn't
fine art or graphic design.
No, yeah, more graphic design, commercial art stuff.
Okay, all right.
And so I wasn't the greatest at computers. Because it was also an interesting time in school because it was they were switching from all of the old methods, actual typesetting and to the newer methods. And so they kind of gave you.
I've talked to a lot of people who went to art school at that time, and they feel kind of pissed or kind of robbed of it all because they got not one of another and too much of the other. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
There was a lot of that happening at that time. So what a tricky time, to be learning that craft.
Right. And that's exactly kind of how I felt too. And then I came out of it having it a basic understanding of computer stuff, Photoshop, Illustrator, whatever, but not enough to actually go and thrive in that.
Yeah.
And I guess maybe I used that as a justification to just kind of keep going in the direction that I was.
Yeah. Makes sense.
I ended up getting a few jobs that were sort of related, but more or less still being kind of a starving artist, and all the while really kind of focusing all my attention on graffiti and painting as much as I could.
Mm-hmm. And how are you affording that? Did you get a regular a job? What were you doing to sustain that kind of lifestyle?
Yeah, so at that point, I think I was still probably racking cans. That was part of it. But I ended up getting another job at it was a place called Media Play, which was a kind of like a Best Buy type of place. They had music, videos, books, whatever. And so Jared and I ended up working there together, and we were able to, we had a certain budget that we could use for our supplies each week. And I would go, there was an art store down the street, and I would go and get cans from there that I was supposedly using on projects. And it was more or less using their supplies. And right around the same time, I got hip to mixing colors. So I'd be sitting at work, making stickers and mixing colors and, sketching and whatever.
That's pretty awesome.
And
sounds like a dream job for a kid.
It was
yeah,
totally. It was perfect. And like I said, I'd already sort of gotten these bad habits of pushing my actual assignments from school until the last minute, and I was doing the same thing there. where I'd like, they'd come down every once in a while and be like, "So what are you working on?" Like, "Oh yeah, I'm doing this right here," type of thing. Yeah, it was fantastic.
So you're working at that electronics place. You're getting free supplies from them, which is dope. You're painting a lot. Was that? Do you remember at that time, like? And I asked this to a lot of people, if you had like kind of foresight as to where this was going, or were you like many of us, just sort of living in the moment and just piecing and being a graph kid, and that was it?
Yeah, that was definitely more it. I didn't see at that point in time, even though it was starting to like gain more momentum and be more in the mainstream, I still never really thought of, oh, I could use this to make some kind of career out of, or, that this would be kind of sought after. I mean, there was definitely, we had a small gallery that we'd sell stuff through that was started by Rasta. And so I'd, do some canvases every once in a while and throw them in there. But I was still kind of like, I felt like, nobody's going to really want to pay money for this, it was definitely a, personal passion and something that I was enjoying doing. And I definitely had people who were encouraging that, but I didn't ever see it on a bigger scale than that. So,
which is normal, totally normal. There's a few people I've talked to that were like, "Oh yeah, I knew New Yorkers who had made a thing of it, so I knew it could be a thing." And I know for us, like we saw Twist start to kind of make these moves towards like the MoMA that. I'm thinking, oh, whoa, like this has got broader appeal. I mean, I didn't think of it in that way, but I realized there was broader appeal, and I was like, oh, there could be something here. But and I just asked that because I'm curious about if you could have that, if you had any of that vision, or if you were just like in the moment, which I think is even better, to just be like living it and bombing and painting and just like not worrying about tomorrow.
So that's pretty much where I was at. And I'm actually glad that you brought up Twist, because along with my trip to LA, I ran across Twist's work. I think I want to say I'd maybe seen him in one of those early mags, but the first time I really got to look at his work was, there's a magazine called Maximum Rock and Roll. It's like a kind of punk rock zine. And they did a spread on him, and they had probably, I don't know, 6 or 8 pictures of his stuff and like a little quick interview with him. And I would say that him, among maybe a couple other people, were like the biggest influence on me wanting to get better at my character game, and just the application of it too. Like these quick, simple color scheme. Again, the whole flare utilization. Just, it was beautiful. And it really kind of spoke to me. And but anyway, back to I didn't want to derail us too much. I just wanted to say
it's good to give him a shout. Definitely, he influenced a lot of us, so many people. And so and I think we were talking about basically how you were starting to progress stylistically, and also just like with the balance of like working and just painting every day. Is that how things like persisted for you throughout the now getting into the mid 90s? Was it a daily operation where you focused on graph kind of 24/7?
Yeah, more or less. There for a minute, it was just a constant thing. And that around this point in time, as we're kind of going through it, is when I was introduced to Emmett. And that was, definitely sort of a pivotal point for me as well, because I'd seen those guys' work, stuff they're doing out in Connecticut, New York, and a friend of mine, another writer, a guy named Chester, who's actually still around too, we were in a crew together around that point in time, told me that Emmett was out here. And I was like, no, you gotta be kidding me. This guy's gotta be just, some faker or something, And I said, oh, yeah, he dropped a piece over at Coffee on the Hill, which is this legal wall that we got by that point. So I went over there, and it just so happened that I was on acid the day that I went by there. And so I see his piece there, and I'm just like blown away, like, whoa, this is actually the dude. Like, no fucking way. I can't believe this guy's actually here. And I thought maybe he was just like passing through or whatever. I touched base again with my boy, said, yeah, I saw his work. Wow, holy shit. And so he ends up, we get introduced to each other somehow. And, it turned out that he'd sort of taken notice of my work as well. And from that point forward, it was just this, we started painting together, and he really, it kind of took me to the next level of things.
Yeah, talk about it. It was like, cause I don't really, he's been on the show, so he's like friend of the podcast, but I don't know him personally. I never painted with him. And I'm wondering like what it was about him beyond the mystique, right? Cause of course it's like, whoa, this is like this guy from New York and Connecticut that's like kind of just killing it and this original style. Was there more to it than that? I mean, you guys must have clicked just as like two dudes. Yeah. Two friends.
Yeah. So, we're close to the same age. He'd gotten a head start. He started a couple years before I did, but on a similar kind of trajectory, I would say. And yeah, we definitely clicked. But it was mainly this thing of like just sort of mutual appreciation, and like I said, he clued me into different styles that I think at this point I was still mainly influenced by West Coast. Okay. Yeah. So when I saw his style, which all those guys sort of stood out to me from the pack per se. Like they all had these unique kind of characteristics. But around that same time, I'd also seen Gaze's work, and which, like, even now today, his work still is just so unique and beautiful.
Yeah, it stands up.
Yeah. So, and knowing that he had, connection to all these different people out there on the East Coast was like, and within, I think, probably 6 or 8 months of us knowing each other, I ended up going out to Connecticut with him. It might have been a little bit longer. I think we'd been painting together for a while, but I got out there, got introduced to other DF members, and painted out there, and that was the point in time they kind of decided to put me in the crew.
That's pretty dope.
And I want to say it was 95.
And that was your first time out east? Yeah.
And it was a similar thing with when I'd hit LA. Obviously out there is just like a whole different animal, like, especially compared to, Denver or whatever. It was, seeing the highways out there where
just wrecked.
Oh my God. And even down in the boroughs and seeing like, all these kind of parking lots that have these just amazing productions on them. I think I'm trying to remember which was the one that I was most in love with. I think it was the, there's this one, it was a city scene with these like red and yellow clouds. It was cess per sub. I'm trying to remember who else. And there's these like comic book frames throughout it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I never saw it in person. I saw it in magazines, but yeah, that was a classic production. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just like, I guess it was FXDF. Yeah. They just like slaughtered.
Right. Yeah.
And so like Emit took you around, like you basically did that. You got to tour around in the city, and you also went into Connecticut. Did you? And you were painting as well. Where'd you paint with all the DF guys?
So we just he took me on a little tour around the city right after I got off the plane. I got to see some of those productions in person, which is just like mind blowing in itself. But then we ended up going to Connecticut. I painted with him and the rest of our crew at that point in time in Bridgeport. And it's funny, he had just the other day posted that as a defective film production. And we also did another some burners on this pet shop wall, and then a fair amount of toss-ups, and I was only out there for I think about a week, and so we got quite a bit in that short amount of time.
That's awesome. And then you get put into like DF, which is like this pretty famous crew, like famous dude, like within the graph world.
Yeah,
and so that must have been you must have been kind of riding high on the hog at that point.
Yeah, definitely. It was it was definitely an honor to meet all those guys, and I go out there with sort of this like a little bit nervous and just not really knowing what to expect, and then jumping off the plane, immediately going into New York, and it's just just like 8 lanes of traffic, and just people, the whole New York vibe, and graph everywhere. I was kind of overwhelmed in a way, but having those guys with me and just sort of like showing me what was up, and then when we were painting, there's people coming by introducing themselves. I met Yes2, Zephyr, quite a few others, and then also seeing all these other smaller walls out in Connecticut, and just the whole experience was like so welcoming and kind, and all those guys that I ran into were just really great dudes. And the other aspect of it that up to that point, maybe because of the way the Denver scene was kind of groomed, I felt like it was this essential part that you had to be sort of hip hop and whatever. Well, when I went out to New York, that whole image was shattered, because all those guys are very diverse, into their own thing, unique guys that aren't like, they're not catered by, or not catering to that particular style of the movement. They're all doing their own thing. It just happens to be that graph is something else that they do.
Yeah, that must have been really interesting to learn and just see firsthand.
Yeah, it really was, and I definitely came back from that trip with this whole renewed inspiration and vision of the whole thing, and also this like widened scope of styles and what could actually be accomplished through this.
Yeah, it must be amazing. I mean, I'm thinking about the names of people that you said you met, like Yes2 and Zephyr, like that must have just been like a really incredible transition for you, right? Because again, like you've like broadened your like perspective on things, and you've like deepened your connections in the community, and you're right. I mean, I just having your name mentioned by someone like Zephyr back then, like, could have just kind of like meant the
world. Yeah.
So, I can only imagine, man, like what you were thinking when you get back to Denver and you're like, oh, cool. Now I'm going to do this next thing. Right. It's like, I didn't know how this interview was going to go, and I'm really glad that we actually, because I think that's our time for this, for part one, basically, and we only covered like the first 4 years of your graph life, which is actually, I mean, I love when this happens, dude, because I think the little stories, the little moments, the names that you brought up, and just like us taking our time talking about that tester cap, and how you probably went to Rasta and you were like, yo, look at this. Like, that's the stuff, man, that I think our listeners really dig. I know I do, there's all these big pivotal moments in your graph career that we haven't touched on yet. And in your personal life, of course, that we haven't touched on yet, but we'll get there. And I think that like our lives, man, are important enough to take the time to slow down and break it up and unpack it all, like we just did. So, and I hope that will you come back, man, and do a part 2 down the road so we can get all up to date with everything?
Oh man, I'd be so honored.
Good. That's great.
Yeah.
Because 91 to 95. And like I said, this idea now that you go back to Denver and you have this really bigger understanding. You've seen a huge scene in LA, you've seen a huge scene in New York, and now you're back in Denver, which is a developing scene. I can't wait to hear more about it.
Cool.
And again, dude, I thank you for coming on. For people that don't know you, where can we find your work online? I know you have an Instagram page. What's that account? Yeah,
it's at Tuke1, spelled out O-N-E on the end.
Tukeone on Instagram. Is there anywhere else that we should keep an eye out for your stuff?
At the moment, no. I'm in the process of building a site, and I'll get a link to it through Instagram once I get it all up and running.
Yeah, and it's like less and less people are even doing that because it's just like the Instagram page is just so easy for people.
I know. It is. But yeah.
I mean, I own a site. I continue to update it. I feel like it's just like something I don't know. I need to do it. But for our listeners that don't know you, go and follow at Tuke1. Noah, dude, I thank you, man. Again, it's been super, super interesting, and we're blessed to have you on. So thank you.
Thank you. Definitely a pleasure to be here.
My Life in Letters is looking to grow and expand our team. If you think you're right to collaborate and partner with us, please drop us a line at either mylifeinletterspodcast@gmail.com or send us a direct message at our Instagram page at My Life in Letters Podcast. My Life in Letters is recorded live in Bushwick, Brooklyn, USA. Our sponsor is sprayplanet.com. Our producer is Christopher Piccioni. Our videographer is Jordan Miller for Way Up Creative. Our intern is Jessica Magar. Our theme music is by Fonte, and my name is Adam Fujita. Thanks for listening. Have a great day. Peace.
The language of letters.
My life, my life, my life, my life.